let me tell you a little bit about what our next talk is. So closing threat detection gaps with Open XDR. And this is going to be presented by Inbar, the VP of Research at Hunters. Welcome. You are muted. No worries. Inbar, you are muted.
Right.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Okay. So thank you for hosting me, and everybody, welcome to my little retro computing man cave, I guess. It's my hobby for the past couple of years. And let's go back to the first slides. There we go. I want to talk today about closing the threat detection gaps, which means letting you know what you're seeing and what you're not seeing. And let's start by why actually we prefer the MITRE, the attack matrix and everything, because it's the universal language. We all see that, for example, the naming conventions on malware, the AV software, EDRs, everybody has their own name. It's kind of hard to know if you're reading a report that someone published and you want to learn something from that. Then they have one name, but then you end up having another name. Sometimes they combine into campaigns, sometimes they don't. And if you just take a sample, and this is, I'd like to, I think we're missing the bottom of the slide here, but I'd like to thank my friends at GData for giving this hash. If you look at this sample, you can see that it has 18 detection on VirusTotal from about 2 months ago, and pretty much every engine has a different name, and it's really hard to talk to other people and to exchange information and share when you're not talking the same language. If I were hit by a malware that is identified by one name and you had the same malware, we might not be able to easily understand that we're talking about the same thing. And that brings us to the point where the MITRE ATT&CK actually provides a common language. And that's very important because if you look at the various products that you have, they also don't necessarily talk the same language. Different products may have different names for their detections and the alerts. And the person sitting at the SOC, they're not always qualified in all of these domains, right? You have multiple domains. You can see a bunch of them here with a bunch of specific security products in those domains, and they don't necessarily even speak the same language. When one describes an attack, that's not necessarily how the other one describes it. And when you're trying to understand a larger incident, and coming soon to the XDR point, how everything connects to each other, then there has to be some common language where you can take a thread and run it through the different detections and figure out how everything is connected. And the biggest advantage, in my opinion, is the fact that this is actually just regular language that everybody can understand. If to be a cloud expert, you need to learn the jargon of the specific cloud platform and what they use for the identity management. Here, when you talk about analyzing what actually happened, you have high-level, understandable definitions in simple language that help you understand, even if you're not a domain expert. And the same goes for the techniques. It's all very simple, easily understandable, and that helps a lot. And I think that's how MITRE achieved the objective of becoming a common language, because it's easy to understand for everybody. And and the result of that is that this has become the de facto standard for describing what happened. If you even look at the MITRE groups page, you will see that many of the groups, they have at the bottom references to research that was published by multiple vendors and researchers. And at the end of each, you will see a little, or almost each, you will see a little block specifying these are the attacks that we've seen. These are the techniques and the tactics, so everybody can understand what they saw. And that is in addition to the entire research, which every researcher will do to their own flavor. Some will put more emphasis on one thing, some on the other. And if you just jump to the end and you'll get this little table, you'll have a clear and quick understanding of what actually happened in a language that you can easily understand. And here's an example from the DFIR report website, which I really like and I recommend to everyone if you're not already following them. They publish a full investigation of an attack, which is kind of unusual because in the world that we live in, all of us that do defense, we want to stop things before they culminate and before the attacker reaches their objective. And what you have here is in fact an analysis of a complete attack. And you can see here that the analysis at the end of the document, after explaining to you every single step, what was exactly being done in the most technical level, maybe you're in that domain and you understand it, maybe you don't. At the end, you will have this little slide or a list telling you exactly what tactics and techniques were used, and you can easily understand what you're looking at. Now we come to the problem that we're facing. There are a lot of different domains. You have your endpoint, you have your cloud, you have your identity network, you can have the firewall or the proxy, you can have an email product, maybe you have something on your mobile, something about containers maybe, and you really need to know how the products that you have installed, your security suite, is helping you to cover this domain. Not everybody can do everything, and sometimes you really want to know, especially if you're in charge of protecting your entire organization, where do you stand? What will you be seeing if it happens, and what you won't be seeing? And what you get when you use an Open XDR is basically you get an out-of-the-box threat coverage map, which takes all the detections that your products incorporated into the XDR provide, and it will lay them over the attack matrix, and it will show you which of the techniques and sub-techniques are being covered, so you can have a quick look and understand. And this is a screenshot from our product, but other products have that as well. You can see the green areas, and these are parts of the matrix that are being covered. It is important to say that while these squares are green, that does not necessarily mean that everything is being covered. Because of frameworks like the MITRE ATT&CK, which give the defenders a lot of advantage and the ability to coordinate, then attackers keep having to find new ways to get behind or get past our defenses. At the end of the day, an attacker comes to achieve something, and that will not change. And I think this is one of the few principles that are on the side of the defender. An attacker that comes to steal your files or encrypt them or I don't know, do any other sort of damage, that is their objective. And to do that, they have to do certain things. They can't avoid that. And once you start detecting them, they will try other things, but they will still need to achieve the same goal. And this is where the TTP plays the part of creating sort of an abstraction layers that lets you understand what is being done and what is being protected against. And what you can see here is that this organization, which is specifically a lab environment, out of the entire 570 detectable techniques. Now, if you're keen on the new MITRE ATT&CK 10 that was just released, then you know that summing up the techniques and the sub-techniques doesn't really reach 570. In fact, it's 188, I think, and 300 and something. Let me tell you, it's 379. And the sum of that is actually a little bit less than 570. And the gap is, in fact, a few detections of techniques that we found, and we're actually in the process of reporting them to MITRE, so they get included in the next matrix. So here you can see that potentially the customer that would be looking at that screen could see that they're covering this and that part of the matrix. And I think the most important thing that you can see, other than understanding what you see and what you cover, is understanding what you don't see and what you don't cover. And this allows you to better decide where to put your next dollar. Which is the more important security product that you're missing that will give you a better coverage when you're facing certain threats. And each organization is facing different threats. Some care more about confidentiality, some about availability, some have backups, some don't have backups. So every customer needs to make their own decision, but this will allow them to know where they're going and what they need to add. Now, if we look at this screenshot, this is not a full lab environment. This is a screenshot when I'm playing around with some of the setup. So you can see that I've already played a little bit with that. The original number was 20 and 26. I've already tagged something, so it's +1. And if you look on the left, you will see that the GCP audit data source, which is supported by the Open XDR product, is not being ingested by the customer. This could happen because maybe they didn't add it to the product, maybe they don't have that. But if I click it, then I will see, and I will go now back and forth between the last two slides, you will see how the numbers change and how some of the squares change their color, and also the little numbers inside them, which says how many specific detectors exist for that particular technique or collection of sub-techniques. And it's important because this allows you to visualize exactly what you will be getting by adding any one of the already supported products of the Open XDR. And of course, as a customer, you can always ask for additional data sources, and then you will immediately see how they affect your coverage. And it's a very important tool that helps you to, decide what to do next. Now, the synergy with the Open XDR is not just the ability to see what data sources you have and what coverage you have. We're especially talking about creating the stories. The stories is what we call the connection of events to see how they create a larger attack story. Instead of, I think Maor was using that term, the silo detections. If you just look at one data source, you can see what's happening, but you don't necessarily know what it's connected to. Now imagine that you're a SOC analyst and you're sitting and you're getting all the detections from all your data sources. Now put aside the fact that the numbers could be huge. You could get hundreds and thousands of alerts per day. You would need to know which one is connected to which other one, and maybe something is going on here. Maybe these are all attacks that are being blocked by your security suite, but maybe something is going on. A lot of the times when you read the reports, you will see that an attacker got blocked. For example, the endpoint product detected something and blocked it, and then the attacker takes their time, they think of something else, and then they come back and they do that, and that thing no longer gets detected. But then something else will happen, and that could already be on a different data source. Now, when you take multiple data sources from multiple domains and you convert them to TTPs, then it is easier for the analyst to understand, because as we said earlier, we're talking about simpler language. Now let's go back to the this big excuse me, the big map of all the products, something that started at the network and then made it to the endpoint, or the other way around. And then the endpoint starts looking around. Maybe a stolen identity was used, maybe multiple factor authentication was bypassed or stolen. These are all things that happen in different domains, and you need to know that they connect. And the way to do that is, aside from knowing how they connect, also to place them on a timeline. And this is what we call an attack story. And the one that you can see here shows how events that happened, that started, for example, with one data source. You can see here that we talk about the who did the thing that was being detected. what happened and where is the actual server or computer or mobile device, wherever that happens. And the detections are being grouped by the identifying features. And as you look at the timeline on the left, you can see that as time progresses, this is an old attack from April, then you will see that the attack is advancing. The attacker did something in one domain and then moved to another one, and they are being connected. These little arcs that go between the different nodes, this is almost a graphic representation. A graph is in fact what we use in the back end. Then you can see how events from different data sources connect to each other and they create a better story that you can understand. And this is just the beginning of an attack. When you see this, you get the opportunity to respond and mitigate the attack before the attacker actually gets to the exact resource they were trying to reach, or maybe start encrypting your files or stealing them and then encrypting them. You really want to detect that before. And here you can already see that something is starting to happen. The next thing you want to do, and this is how we actually do that in the back end, by collecting the signals. We call them signals, and there's a reason for that, because as I mentioned earlier, many of the detections generate a lot of noise. You can have something that in 99% of the cases is okay. We start, when we have a detection, we know what it could do, but we don't always know whether or not it's part of a real attack story. So we're talking in terms of risk and confidence. We know that it happened because detectors don't lie. A detector says that something happened, right? You get a TTP, but a TTP alone in itself does not necessarily have to be a part of an attack. So as you gather them over time, what you want to do is start connecting them. And this is being done by a variety of ways, from simple ones. Let's put the data on a graph and see which different event share entities. Is that an IP address? Is that a user identity? Is that a server? And then you can connect them and create a knowledge graph with relationships. And on top of that, as you start scoring that and you bring additional information such as threat intelligence sources and maybe something that the SOC analyst did in the past, we can classify events based on feedback from the operator, right? And eventually you start seeing an attack story which gets scored, and all of a sudden a single TTP that on its own had no significance, or at least you couldn't tell what it was a part of. Now a TTP becomes a part of a story and a part of a TTP chain. And TTP chains are already something that we can work on, because we can compare them to things that have already happened, and the analyst is able to do that. Now, this is just a visualization. This is not part of the product, but when we try to explain to our customers what we want them to achieve, and then this is the model that we use. What you see here is basically an attack story that evolved over multiple data sources. And the attacker started by doing one thing and getting information, leveraging that to do something else. This is not news, okay? You've heard that before. But when you look at the graph, you can see multiple data sources being cross-correlated in order to get an attack story that tells you the entire occurrence. Now, as I mentioned before, we really hope not to see these. The whole point of doing all this is to get an early detection. You can also do that with prediction. There was a very nice article by Microsoft earlier this year, and you can look at something starting to happen and already predict what's going to happen next based on your knowledge of whether it is the likelihood of certain TTPs to happen one after the other, or maybe you're already suspecting a particular actor. And this allows you to suggest what to do earlier, or maybe raise the flag earlier before you're sure, and let the SOC operator make up their mind whether they want to look further into that You can investigate into each one of the detectors, see what they reported, and then do some more drilling down on the entities that were involved and the actions, and see whether it is related to anything else in your organization. But at the end of the day, the TTPs create an abstraction layer that both helps you easily understand if you're not a domain expert, and also generate this story that is sort of a fuzzy logic implementation of tell me what's going on here. Because if you use strict descriptions, like the attacker used this and that command line, then all they have to do is change a command line and the whole story no longer forms. But when you do this little abstraction, which loses some of the information on the way, of course, but gives you a higher level explanation, you're now able to look at a story that tells you in broader terms what happened, where did it happen, and now you can decide what to do with it, put it in your repository, investigate it, mitigate it, whatever you want. This is pretty much it. If you guys have any questions, then I'm happy to help.
Thank you. That was wonderful. So we do have a couple of questions. And for anyone who is, thinking, what other questions should I ask? Feel free to put it directly in the 2B channel, which is the MITRE discussion track channel. Or you just go into the Hunters one as well. But we are taking Q&A directly from Zoom as well. So if you have some questions on there, feel free to do so. So we have one question for you, which is, once you're affected with ransomware, is there a way out to decrypt it, or do you have to pay the ransomware?
So it's an interesting question, because there's a huge debate now that might, at the end of the day, be decided not by what we as security experts think, but rather by what regulators choose. At least in Israel, that's where I'm at. There are talks now about considering prohibiting by law payment to ransomware operators. Of course, this is a commercial business. I mean, they're criminals, but criminals work for money, and the business laws are the same. They want money, and if they can't get paid, then hopefully they'll go do something else. But it's not even just whether you want to pay or not. Of course, a good CISO will tell you, you don't need to pay because you're supposed to have a disaster recovery plan, and you're supposed to have backup for everything. Of course, you can have a different discussion whether you're wanting to pay money as to prevent your data from being published, but that's a different question. That's extortion. But as far as ransomware and encryption goes, you're not supposed to need to pay. You're supposed to have backup copies of the important things. And even then, are you going to encrypt? Are you going to pay? How do you know that it's not going to happen again? What does paying mean for your company's reputation? Do you have to divulge that? Do you have to report that? What is it going to do to your stock price? So this is such a complicated question that really shouldn't be answered just by security people, because I would tell you, if you have backups, you really shouldn't pay. But it's a lot more complicated than that.
Is there a way out of ransomware?
A way out of ransomware? Well, that's a tough question. I think that if you work for long enough in the security, whether as an attacker or a defender, then you know that the attackers always have not necessarily the upper hand, but the first hand. They make the first step. The defenders always respond. And it is only once in a while that the defense manages to come up with this tool or methodology or some trick to give it some head start over the attackers. I've been in this business for a long time. Attacks come and go. At the moment, because of the financial impact, I think ransomware is going to stick for a while. If what I mentioned before about countries starting to prohibit payment, if that happens, then there might be a completely external factor that changes the threat landscape. But as far as the threat landscape looks right now, I don't see that going away soon. What you can do is work better on your detection and response time. the faster we respond. Some attacks will only take 4 hours end to end. So the faster you can respond to an attack, the lesser the damage is. And it's going to be some compromise between losing some of the data and preventing the loss of the rest of it. And maybe if you have to pay, it's for less. But I don't see that going away quickly.
And then I have a question for you based on what you talked about. When it comes to response time, sometimes it can take hours, sometimes it can take days, weeks, months. Do you think that our burnout crisis that's been ongoing, and it seems like it's getting worse right now, is if there's any, advice that you have for people that are overseeing security teams, what are some ways that they can minimize the burnout when they're responding to an incident such as this?
I think, first of all, something that I mentioned in my talk is the ability to get a heads up for something. I don't remember the number, every year it gets updated, but I think the average time to detection of a malware campaign somewhere between 7 to 9 months. And that just, there's no justification for that. Now, I wouldn't go as far as say that we get these numbers from organizations that had some sort of a gap in their protection. I think no one wants to get pawned, and everybody's doing whatever in their power to do that. But I think that using products that help you better sieve through all the alerts that you're getting and throw away those that are not important or that are not imminent. I mean, it's naive to think that you only have one attack going on. You have to assume that, I mean, Maol just mentioned that you connect something to the internet within the hour, any number of random people are going to try to attack it because they're scanning the internet. So you might have 2 attacks going, but one of them is in an advanced stage. One of them may be just port scanning your network, and maybe they have hold of some unimportant server, but the other one is already getting close to the main controller. So you need to know something is going on. And I think that the more we have a common language and we share our experience, and the MITRE infrastructure is a great example, then I think that companies such as the one I work at can have tools that will take the weight a little bit off the shoulders of the people that sit in front of the control panel or the dashboard and have to deal with that. I think what we eventually want to do is leave to the analyst what we need a human for and let the computers do the rest. Everything at scale, faster, make decisions, and when we need the human to make that decision that we are not sure that we should do, that's where we should leave for the analyst. And if that boils down to a lot less, maybe we're not going to get as much burnout. I don't know, I'm just being optimistic here.
And now I really like your response. So we have our last question, which is, could you say more about attack stories? What actually gets correlated and how is it done? Is it machine learning algorithms in the back end?
So that sounds like a question from a competitor, and that's fair. We have a variety of techniques to do the correlation, anything from simple data matching to heuristics to machine learning. And as I said during the presentation, you need to know what connects to what and what is important. For example, if you have a big organization with a NAT, and the IP that you get is the outside IP, then of course you can't start correlating things based on that, because then every single computer in the organization is going to pop into the story. So you need to learn over time what the organization does, how it's built, what other organizations do. The ability to have a SaaS solution is that anything that you learn from the experience of one customer can be implemented as a service to the rest. And we learn from each other, and we try to create the stories based on what we see happening. Now, a lot of the times it's based on that knowledge graph that I mentioned before. We put what we know on the graph, and then we inspect it like a person would do, and we try to estimate what is related and what is not related. But we will also use our experience and the things that we have seen in the past that tell us these two nodes on the graph are more likely to be connected. This is not always a binary answer, like should you travel by this node or not? Sometimes it can be statistical. It's a lot of, that's actually the secret sauce. And I suppose every one of the vendors, and there are a lot of very good players in this field, everybody has their own sauce. And I think that the more we talk about it, we can enrich each other. This is a big playing ground, and everybody wants to help. So we should find a way. I mean, I've been doing that in other fields that I've been in before. When you go to a conference for researchers, people talk about what they do, even behind the scenes, and everybody gets idea. And at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. We're here to help customers, even if we learn from our competitors or teach them. Actually, right now, we're in the process of, we found an attack, a real attack at one of our customers that involved a product by one of our competitors. And the attacker managed to bypass that competitor to a certain extent. And it would be the easiest thing to just, put them to shame and say, hey, you see, they didn't catch them. But no, instead, we reached out to that competitor and said, look, guys, this is something we think you should know about, because we need to make the world a better place, right? I mean, it's a cliche, but there's no, we don't want to, I don't know how to say that exactly, but we really want people to be able to protect themselves, defend themselves. So we are collaborating. So while I might not give you the exact answer that whomever asked the question was hoping for, I hope what I did say kind of gives you the general idea.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your presentation. If anyone has any additional questions, feel free to message him at the channel for hunters.